Father, we praise you. You're a great God, and we love you very much. Thank you for your truth. We ask that you would teach us your truth and help us to understand worldviews and be able to articulate our faith and help us to be able to think correctly, to see the world the way you see it. So teach us now, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, if I remember right, we left off last week looking at the teleological argument for the existence of God. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
Good. Okay. You're thinking, I don't remember that word, but where the argument from design, that first we saw the cosmological argument for the existence of God, the argument that the universe had a beginning, therefore there must be some kind of uncaused cause that started all of this. And then we looked at the teleological, which argues for the idea that there appears to be design in the universe, and if there is, then the best explanation for that design is a designer, someone who designed it. The universe looks like a giant machine, so therefore there must have been a machinist, someone who created this thing, and obviously a very intelligent one, very powerful one. So we're looking at that, and then we broke up into little groups and talked with each other. I hope you enjoyed doing that. But one thing that I didn't bring out, because we didn't have time, and so I want to go into this now, is that there is an explanation. Remember, this is how we're trying to show how Christianity is a better explanation of the world than atheism, than the idea of naturalism. And so we're looking at the evidences for a creator and so forth. But one of the things that the naturalists will bring out is that the idea of evolution. Okay? So they would say that though the universe appears to be designed, it could be that though it appears that way, it's actually just due to random causes. And then they point to evolution, which is at least an explanation from living organisms. They would say that though there appears to be design when you see human beings, the explanation for that is evolution, that evolution, due to random causes, brings about this seemingly designed thing, but really it just all came about by chance. So I want to talk about evolution for a moment and just give some thoughts that I have. I don't claim to be a scientist or anything, but have done a number of studies on this. First of all, I would say that the idea of evolution does not discount the teleological argument for the existence of God, because the teleological argument argues from creation that of non-living matter, that the universe itself appears to be designed, so it has nothing, biological design, it would be another part of that. That's just one part of the whole part of design. But I don't think that evolution disproves this idea, the teleological design, even in biological systems, because I think the evidence goes against evolution. So I'll share with you my thoughts on why I do not agree with evolution. Now, I do want to give this little caveat here, okay? Because most of the time, when you have people from Christians arguing from one perspective, and then you have atheists arguing from another perspective, usually they're arguing from completely different perspectives, and they just pass each other. They don't even understand each other. I think the Christians actually understand the non-Christians, but I don't think the non-Christians understand the Christians. So let me just say it that way. What I mean by that is when you say evolution, Christians say, I don't believe in evolution. The non-Christians say, well, you should, because there's all kinds of evidence for evolution. When the non-Christians are asked, what evidence do you have, they always give you what's called microevolution evidence. In other words, they say, here's some evidence that within a species there is change. So they'll argue that, human beings have gotten taller, or moths can change colors due to the environment or whatever. But, all of their explanations are actually simply explanations of microevolution. That is, change within a species. All Christians, fully embrace that. There's not the staunchest fundamentalist that you can find that doesn't believe in microevolution. Everyone embraces that. Of course there's change. Of course we're taller now. If you've ever gone to some of the houses in the earlier days, you got to stoop down to get through the doorway. Why? Because they were shorter back then. Okay? But that's nothing. That has absolutely nothing to do with macroevolution, because that's what Darwin proposed. Darwin didn't just say microevolution. He said there's this giant scheme where one species, due to whatever factors, evolves into another higher species. It becomes a completely different species. That's macroevolution. That's what Christians disagree about. They say there's no evidence for macroevolution. There hasn't been a single person that's ever been able to put in a scientific test tube or scientific experiment evidence that shows one species changing into another species. None. It's never been done. So you ask them, scientific method. We talked about that, I think, briefly a few weeks back. Scientific method, right? That's what scientists go by. It's a scientific method. The scientific method has never shown anything of any one species evolving into another species. You just simply can't do it. They say, well, but we just know from microevolution that it probably must have happened. I'm like, so you're going by no evidence? No evidence whatsoever? Well, what is your evidence? Well, let me discuss some of the evidence against evolution and why it seems to me that if we can get them to nail down, and once again, I've read their books, all of their books, when they are trying to advocate evolution, all the evidence is microevolution, not macroevolution. So, what's the evidence against macroevolution? First of all, the origin of life itself. Just the very beginning. The origin of life from non-living material goes against the scientific rejection of spontaneous generation. Evolution's theory of origin is science fiction, not science. See, evolution, the naturalists say that, well, we believe in evolution, and so there must have, but obviously there had to have been a start, so it couldn't, the very first one had to start from non-living material becoming living material. And usually, if you have your biology books or so forth, that's usually about chapter 3 is where they start that. They start speaking that. But if you look at chapter 1, in almost all biology books, chapter 1 talks against spontaneous generation. It brings up Louis Pasteur and his experiments, that they proved that rotten meat doesn't produce maggots, that it's in actuality flies flying in, because there's never, ever, ever been a single experiment whatsoever of a non-living material becoming living material. Usually they say, way back in the day when there's this primordial soup. Okay, you got your nice primordial soup. It's got all the conditions just set and just ready. And so with all of that conditions just ready, with a little bit of lightning strike, of course, with enough attempts, we're going to get, non-living material become living. Hey, let me just save you the time. Okay? You don't have to go back to the primordial soup. Take a fly. Catch it, pull off the wings so it can't fly away. Put it on the ground and go like this. You've got all the material for a living organism, don't you? It was just alive, right? So you got all the material right there. Zap it with some lightning and let's see it come back to life. You won't do it. Nobody ever has. Frankenstein is not real. Okay? That's why I say this is science fiction. And they have to come through with this. Come on. You're expecting us to embrace this whole thing and chuck the whole idea of religion completely out of our country and our system and our beliefs and our thoughts when you have no evidence whatsoever for this? Non-living material. Science says non-living material cannot produce life. So why don't you just go by the evidence? Reject this idea of at least the beginning of evolution. Reject the idea because that's what science says. Why don't they? Why don't they?
Because there must be a God.
Because they don't want to believe in a God, right? It's not because the science leads them to that. It's because they don't want to believe in God. That's why. This first point is absolutely critical, and they cannot answer. All science says non-living material does not produce living material. So why not go by the science? We can show this in the test tube, can't we? We've tried to do everything we can to produce life. There's actually some phony stuff out there where they claimed they were able to at least produce some amino acids. They're not alive, okay? But they claimed to produce that, you know, and that was, but then it turned out that was a myth anyway. That actually never even happened. So, origin of life, that's an important point to start out with. Second, evolution is, in my opinion, in opposition to the second law of thermodynamics. At least it's asking for, arguing for the opposite of what the second law of thermodynamics states. I will get to that later because I'm going to give you, I have that on another slide in just a moment, what that law is. So let's just pause there and I'll explain that later, okay? Fossil evidence goes against evolution. Here, let me go to that one. I'm going to go just do that first here. Oh, by the way, there's 3 possibilities for the origin of life, okay? 3 possibilities, as far as I can find. Abiogenesis. That's the idea that non-living material produced life. So it just, primarily, well, that science goes against that. Some scientists have recognized, at least they say, there's not enough time, even holding to an old universe idea, there's not enough time for life to come about in the complexity that we see it now. And so they advocate what they call directed panspermia, meaning space aliens came. Francis Crick, the guy who got the Nobel Prize for DNA, believes in space aliens came and seeded the Earth. And that's how we got life going a little faster than the moon. I'm thinking to myself, really? These are scientists. And that guy's a smart guy. But why would he leap in the thin air with such ridiculous possibilities? Why would he do that? Because he doesn't want to believe in God. That's the only explanation I can come up with. It makes no sense. The only other option is the fingerprints of God. God did it. Life came about because God did it. Because an intelligent designer designed this whole thing and got it going. The other 2 just seem silly. It seems like we can see design within the universe as well as in biological systems. So therefore, that seems to be the best option available if you're just going by the science. But this isn't allowed to be taught in school. Directed panspermia is. You can teach that one in the schools, but don't dare talk about the fingerprints of God. Don't get it. Somehow we've allowed the atheists to take over our country. They're only about 5%. I don't get it. Well, anyway, I guess I'm getting political. Here's your second law of thermodynamics. Okay. This is a law, by the way. In science, you have your hypotheses, and when you come up with a hypothesis, you try to do several experiments and tests, and if it over and over and over and over again it proves that hypothesis, then it becomes a theory. So a theory is actually not just, hey, I got this idea. No, a theory is something where over and over and over and over again, through test after test after test, it's verified the hypothesis. Then it becomes a theory, okay? But once something is absolutely proven, all scientists agree with it, there's absolutely no way it can't be true, it becomes a law, like the law of gravity. Okay? The second law of thermodynamics is one of those laws. All scientists fully embrace this. It is absolutely true. And this is what it states. In a closed system, the amount of usable energy in the universe is decreasing due to continuing heat loss, and the amount of disorganization or randomness, well, that's terrible, I can't read it, entropy is increasing towards a maximum. In other words, stars are burning out, right? They are. The sun's burning, and eventually that sun is going to burn out. And all of the, what we see as seemingly intricate detail as far as heat and this and that will all kind of meld together, and it goes towards entropy. A great example of this is if you have children, is your child's bedroom. Okay? You don't have to do anything for that bedroom to become less and less organized. Okay? Okay. You know, that's the universe in a nutshell. All right, that's entropy. And this is so. If things are tending towards disorder, evolution says things are tending towards order. If there was something making it happen, you could imagine that. But their idea is that it's just happening due to these, the survival of the fittest and all those things. Once again, still, not understanding. But we never. How did we get life in the first place? And those kinds of things. Those are that's another problem, at least. I don't think it completely disproves evolution, but it is at least something to consider a problem with it. But as I said, with evolution and the fossil evidence, you've seen this, right? Famous tree of life that, from the first, single cell thing that it produced this and this and this and this, and you got this nice gradual thing going, okay? When you look at fossil evidence, that is not what it looks like. This is complete fabrication. This is not what it looks like. This is more what it looks like. Cambrian explosion, which the older scientists date at 540 million years ago. Okay, Cambrian explosion. At that point, before that, in the strata, the rock strata, before that, there was only single cell things. That was it. During that short, brief time period in the strata, every single known phyla, and remember in science you have the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Remember that in your science classes? Okay. Every single known phyla, I think there's like 70 of them, including some that have gone extinct, came into existence. Within that brief time period, every phyla that exists today came into existence. That is not the gradual thing that we're led to believe on the tree, is it? But this is, and search Cambrian explosion. You can look that up. This is the actual evidence for the fossils. So there's none of this gradual. You talk about the missing link. There are billions of missing links. If evolution were true, if it was this gradual, you'd have intermediary species after intermediary species after intermediary species. You would not, unless you're arguing for what actually one scientist argued for, the hopeful monster. Once again, this guy was an actual true scientist saying, well, okay, the fossil evidence just doesn't show it at all, but it's possible that, let's say an animal with legs could produce an animal that had fully functioning wings. Wow, okay, huge difference there. That's what, in fact, I remember a friend of mine, an atheist, I brought this up, and he says, you're right, the evidence is not there in fossil evidence. He says, but just because we can't see it, that doesn't mean it's not there. And he said, most things that die don't become fossils. And I said, well, that is definitely true. Most things that die don't become fossils, so maybe it's possible that we have all these different species that we just never got any fossils for them. But you're still not going by the evidence. Because the fossils we do have, look, this is what we see. Not this nice little tree. So why aren't you going by your evidence? I mean, if you find new evidence later, you can change your mind, right? Isn't that what scientists do? Why not go by the evidence we have right now? And the evidence right now is no evolution. That things, species, appeared immediately on the scene in the rock strata, and then later on, if they went extinct, they disappeared just as quick as they appeared. It's just instant. There's never this gradual thing that is argued for as far as, and even Darwin himself said that he admitted there's no fossil evidence, but he was sure that that would come through. Well, Darwin's been dead for a long time, and we still don't have the evidence. So, hey, let me go back here. Just wanted to show you these pictures. I'm stuck. There we go. I'm just trying to go too fast. How come I'm not working? Here we go. Fossil evidence goes against evolution. Cambrian explosion in particular is one example of that. Okay, so you have this. I like this little picture here. First you have atoms, then it moves to origin of life, but there's a question mark, how in the world that happened. Then there's a question, we don't have any fossil records, and then man, and the scientist says, now class, we don't have any details yet, but we know we evolved. More problems. Gradual change would always be detrimental, selected out by evolution. If an animal is gradually, one parent produces a kid that has, the arms are starting to turn like into wings, but it's real gradual. In the next generation, a little bit more. Next generation, a little bit more, a little bit more. Before those wings were fully functional, that would have slowed the thing down and it would have gotten eaten. You would have been selected out. So gradual change would always be detrimental and selected out by evolution. That's just simply, once again, just arguing against what we see. Mutations never add new information. If you're familiar with genetics, just because there's a little mutation on the X or Y or whatever, it never adds it. It just changes the X to whatever, I'm not, a brilliant scientist when it comes to all this kind of stuff. But I do know that you don't have, a single-celled amoeba producing a multi-celled baby, okay? Because you just don't have this. Mutations don't add new information. They just move around the information that's already within the DNA. It's just mutated. And then incredible creatures. Okay, I'll get to the bombardier beetle here. I want to show you a picture of it. So now I get to go forward here. Okay, can you take me right to the bombardier beetle here? And there's a bunch of creatures that we could mention, but I just like this one because it's pretty cool. Okay, this is a bug. I think he's like down in South America or something like that. And this beetle is pretty interesting. You can once again Google that one too because it's really, really fascinating the way this beetle works. And the way it works, okay, is this beetle has this system that it can shoot this explosive stuff in the face of its predator. So predator's coming along, wants to eat the beetle. Hey, nice lunch. Comes along and then he shoots this thing and blows up in the predator's face. And he goes, not worth the meal, and then takes off, right? Okay. So, but the fascinating way in which this beetle works is it has a couple chambers within its body, its thorax, has a couple chambers that it holds this explosive material inside. Okay. And you think, why doesn't it just explode itself if it bumps on a rock or something? Well, apparently it has some kind of an inhibitor in it that keeps the explosion the stuff from exploding. But when it shoots it out, it has some way in which it makes the stuff explode once it gets out. Okay, and I don't know, I don't understand exactly how it works, but the fascinating thing is, there's no way this thing could have evolved. Just imagine those gradual attempts at having explosive material inside you. They would have been blown up long before it finally got the thing working great to be able to, explode in front of its predator's face. So it just does not fit the evolutionary model, but it sure fits the model of an intelligent designer who's an artist as well, who loves to just come up with, hey, I think I'm going to make the Bombardier Beetle today, you know. Other ones, giraffes and others, are just great examples of incredible creatures that just don't seem to fit this. I have some books that I would recommend if you just like going further into this study. One, Icons of Evolution, Science or Myth. This is an excellent book by a scientist, Jonathan Wells. He goes through all of the myths. You've seen that picture, right? Okay, a myth. Okay, that is, there's no such gradual line of human beings or fossils or anything that we've ever come across. This is a myth. And he brings out all of these myths. And what's fascinating about this, the Haeckel's embryos, the Miller-Urey experiment, Darwin's tree of life, the homology in vertebrate limbs, Archaeopteryx, the bird, the peppered moths, Darwin finches. He looks at every one of those and shows why they're myths, why they actually have nothing to do with evolution. And he also shows how the evolutionists agree. That's the fascinating part. They not only, they agree, yes, those things, we used to say those didn't prove evolution, and you're right, they don't prove evolution at all. But there's other evidence and da-da-da-da-da. But what's fascinating is that they still put those ideas in their books, even though they have debunked their own ideas. You ask why? Because if they get rid of them all, they don't have anything. And so that's a great book. You have to be fairly knowledgeable to be able to understand it because it's written from a scientist's perspective. Another one, Michael Behe, Darwin's Black Box. In this book, he describes one of the things that Darwin said was that if he could, if someone could find something that with what he calls irreducible complexity, that would disprove evolution. Irreducible complexity would mean something that you could not go to a simpler state of whatever that complexity is without the thing not working. And he brings out a couple different examples of irreducible complexity where there's, and the idea, if you, just to kind of get your mind around it, it's like a mousetrap, okay? What do you need for a mousetrap? You got the little board, right? You got the metal piece, and the spring, and the little lever, right? All those pieces are necessary for the mousetrap to work, right? If you were missing any one of those pieces, the mousetrap would not work, right? At all. It just wouldn't work less. It wouldn't work at all, right? So that would be an example of an irreducibly complex mousetrap. Okay, those components are absolutely necessary. If you can find an irreducible complexity of a living organism, then that would prove that thing couldn't have evolved, because any one of those points, without it, it wouldn't work at all, and so it would not have evolved and caused the species to do better and all that, and survival of the fittest and all that. So, but he brings out some great examples there. Another book that kind of puts all this stuff together, the case for the Creator. Remember, we're just arguing right now, helping someone move from agnosticism to theism, right? The case for the Creator is it's a detailed book, but excellent putting all of this together. Talks evolution, I think, is maybe one of the chapters, but those are some good helps there. Okay, so that is my thoughts on. Let me see here, I don't think I have any more, yeah. My thoughts on evolution. So any questions about evolution? And once again, I'm not a scientist, but I might be able to answer. What are your thoughts? Yes?
I had heard a number of years ago that there was a core group of scientists, and these were respected scientists, and not all Christians either. Some may have been agnostic, but they were reliable and authentic scientists. And they put their name to a document. And I was just asking to see if you've heard of this, if this is true. That there was like 600 of them. And they put their name to a document that said, based on the way evolution was proposed, that it is impossible. And they signed it. And again, I did also hear that not all of them were Christians.
Right.
They were willing to join ranks with other scientists and say, according to scientific method, this is impossible. And did you ever hear about that? And what happened with that document with the other scientists?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about the document, but I do know that there have been scientists that have gotten together and they have agreed. There are many. It's definitely a minority within the science field, but there are a number of scientists that have stated. It's very difficult, though, because once you come out and say, I don't agree with evolution, you lose your post. If you want to watch, what's the film? Elizabeth? Expelled. Excellent documentary that brings out actual scientists working for universities that once they didn't even deny evolution, they just began to question it. They were out, and so that's when you put your sign on that document, you're asking to get heard.
More of a comment is, I have read that somewhere between 10 and 30% of quote-unquote scientists are Christian. And the problem with it has become true science is not a consensus or majority. True science is an absolute truth. And we have allowed consensus by non-Christians to become the dogma in our university systems. And it's been a takeover of true science by now, not religion, but getting away from religion and government and universities and atheists to say this is right. Watson and Crick were both atheists, but the person that I'm talking on his name who developed the human genome is a Christian. He said this is the beauty of design, that this whole human genome is absolutely spectacular. And no one could have done it except intelligent.
They used to think that that living organisms, when you got down to the cell, it was just a kind of a basic kind of plasma kind of a thing or something, you know. But now you get into genetics, and it just keeps on going further and further, more and more detail. There's just no way that this could have been anything but design. But you're right.
Science is not consensus.
Yeah, science can't be consensus, because otherwise you'd have to say, back when the consensus was that the universe evolved around the Earth, that was the consensus, so that must have been true science. No. Science is what is real. It is what is true. And so we have to go by the evidence. Yes?
And when you talk of micro versus macroevolution, remember Darwin looked at finches on their beaks on the Galapagos Islands. That's it.
Yeah.
And from that micro, and I was sitting having coffee this morning, and with a hard winter, we have put some corn out for the pheasants and deer. And for the last 2 weeks, these birds and animals have evolved. They have learned that there's some corn sitting out there. It doesn't disprove, intelligent design. It just says creatures to evolve.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no question. And that is a huge point that we have to make. We're not disagreeing with microevolution. We're disagreeing with macroevolution because there's no evidence for it. In fact, all the evidence seems to go contrary to it. Other thoughts, questions? Because this is huge, okay? If evolution is true, that doesn't even disprove Christianity, does it? It doesn't disprove it. You could say God did it that way. And there are actually those who embrace that idea. I don't, but there are those who embrace that everything was, that God made things through evolution. So evolution doesn't disprove Christianity, but if evolution isn't true, then the evolutionists have lost the only thing they had to believe, to embrace their atheism. Because this was their example. Oh, it does look like design, but evolution. And that's why they all jumped on the bandwagon. And once they all jumped on the bandwagon and thinking that, of course, this was all going to come true, once, they found the emperor has no clothes, they just kept on saying, he's got clothes, he's got clothes. And there's no evidence for it. And yet they don't go, it seems to me, they don't go with the evidence. Okay. Well, that's the teleological argument. There is one more argument, So you have the cosmological argument from the creation, you have the teleological argument from the design within the universe, and then you have the moral argument for the existence of God. C.S. Lewis is the one who really got this. I mean, he wasn't the first to embrace this idea, but he really popularized it. Mere Christianity is an excellent book, and it's very readable. Excellent book. C.S. Lewis wrote this. Name escapes me. The guy who was prison fellowship. Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson, when he went to jail for the whole Nixon fiasco, in prison, someone shared with him a copy of Mere Christianity. He got saved, got out of prison, started his ministry, wrote an excellent book, Born Again, and so forth. But this book convinced him, and half the book basically is this moral argument for the existence of God. And that is, unless there is a universal moral lawgiver, there cannot be objectively binding moral obligations. That's the first point. So unless there is a universal moral lawgiver, there cannot be objectively binding moral obligations. There are objectively binding moral obligations. Therefore, there must be a universal moral lawgiver. And that universal moral lawgiver is God. Now, this is a classic statement of evidence here. Now, obviously, the big caveat is that second point there. There are objectively binding moral obligations. If there aren't, then the whole argument falls apart, doesn't it? But if there are, if we can show that there are objectively binding moral obligations, if we can make that point, or at least show that it makes the most sense to believe that there are objectively binding moral obligations, then this argument is very strong. Okay? So let's see. Are there objectively binding moral arguments? And I like this. My conscience has been eating at me all day. Anyway, reasons to believe in moral absolutes. And I know this is not very popular today. In postmodern world, there's a rejection of moral absolutes, but it's really a silly rejection because there's just so overwhelming, in my opinion, evidence for moral absolutes, objectively binding moral absolutes. First of all, there is a universal moral code. Everybody has it. A universal moral code. And this is important even for society to work. I'm trying to find a book here. And To Everyone an Answer, Paul Copan says this. He says, if the divine foundation for moral obligation and human dignity is removed, then the moral motivation may actually be undermined. For example, despite being brought up to believe in God and that human beings are intrinsically valuable, Jeffrey Dahmer was exposed to naturalistic evolution. The result was devastating. This sexual predator and cannibal placed the blame for his murders on his atheistic beliefs in the theory of evolution. Given naturalism, he found no basis for affirming intrinsic human dignity. His father, Lionel Dahmer, expressed Jeffrey's rationale. He said, if it all happens naturalistically, what's the need for a God? Can't I set my own rules? Who owns me? I own myself. If there aren't objectively binding moral laws, then who are we to say to him that he's wrong? See, the alternative to theism undermines the universal recognition of a moral code. That we can't say to him, you're wrong. There is a universal moral code. And I can show this, okay? When someone, let's just imagine somebody walks up to you and just punches you in the face for no other reason than they thought it would be fun. Okay? What would you do? Punch him back. Okay. You wouldn't like it for sure, right? In fact, you might even say something like, that was wrong. You shouldn't do that. Kids do that, right? You next. You just wait. You took my turn. Okay? And what are we arguing when we say stuff like that? We're not saying, well, I just think in my own opinion that it would be nice for you not to punch me, or that I should get to have my turn since you just had your turn. We are appealing to an objective moral standard out there. And we're appealing to it in such a way that we're saying, this is true and you should know it. That person that punched you in the face should know that that's not right. They shouldn't punch you in the face for no reason other than just to have fun. Okay, right? They should know that. And you're appealing to, in fact, they usually even know it themselves. And they'll come up with excuses. Yes, you're right most of the time. You shouldn't punch people in the face for just the fun of it. But just in my case, I think it's okay. Like I'm bigger than you. Or, I have this excuse. They'll come up. But if you punch them in the face, they would also say, that was wrong. I'll tell you what. How many here think it's okay to steal other people's babies? That's a universal moral code. Everybody knows it's wrong to steal other people's babies. And everybody knows that everybody else should know it, even the ones that are stealing babies. And if you were to steal their babies, they'd be mad, wouldn't they? Because this is a universal moral code. Everybody knows it's there. We just don't want to admit it. There are universal moral codes. Moral relativism, the idea that there isn't any moral absolute. Moral relativism does away with the possibility of moral progress. If there's no universal code that this is right, this is good, then there's no possibility for progress. You cannot say to Hitler, you were wrong. You can't. Because his society, his realm, that's what they thought was okay. In fact, if evolution is correct, then we have no basis for condemning Hitler, because he was basically saying survival of the fittest. The strongest should be able to take over the weak. We're just weeding out the groups of people that are weak. Darwin actually taught that in his book. Evolutionists don't like to admit that, but he specifically stated that if this is true, therefore we should get rid of some of the people groups that are inferior, that are passing on bad genes and so forth. Does that make sense? Moral relativism does away with the possibility of moral progress. You can't say our society is better now because better compared to what? If it's all relative, right? Let me ask you this. How many of you think that society is better now that we have passed laws saying women can vote? Guys, I would raise your hand. Okay. Otherwise you're going to get in trouble later. Okay. I personally think it's better. Society is better because women get to vote now. I think that's better because I think there's a universal moral code that states men and women are equal. They are both equally valuable and should have input on how we run our government and so forth. I think that is a moral absolute out there. Okay? And so I think society has got better because women can vote. I hope you do too. Some of you are looking at me strange here, okay? But I think society has gotten better since they outlawed slavery. Okay? But moral progress cannot be measured if there's no moral standard. If everything is relative, then how can you say it's gotten better? And then third, we all have a conscience. Every one of us has a conscience. And this is a kind of a fascinating point here. Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 16 appeals to this. That everyone has that moral code that God has stamped within them. Now, it's not a perfect code because we are sinful human beings and we twist it and we try to go against even our conscience. But everybody has a conscience. In C.S. Lewis's book, he brings this out. He says, there are 2 points I want to make. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they do not, in fact, behave in that way. They know the law of nature, they break it. These 2 facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. We know what's right and wrong, and yet we don't do what we know is right or wrong. We all have this conscience, this moral code stamp. And it's not something that's handed down to us, because it's something that if it was just something handed down, if it was something that just evolved or whatever, you'd have pockets of people that did have conscience, pockets of people that didn't, right? But if it's universal, everybody has a conscience. Everybody has a sense of basic right and wrong. And yet go against that. They're fighting it. They don't want to believe it, but it's there. And then they eventually sometimes sear it to where they can do horrible things or whatever, but they all have that conscience. And so from all of this, it seems that this moral argument would say there's a lot of good evidence that there has to be a moral lawgiver. A universal moral code demands a universal lawgiver. And so, since there is a universal moral code, or at least that seems to be the most likely explanation of all the facts, then there is most likely a universal moral lawgiver. If the universe had a beginning, then that argues strongly that there is an uncaused cause that started it. If the universe appears to be designed by some intelligent designer, then that would argue there is some kind of intelligent designer that designed it. If there is a universal moral code within all of us, then that strongly argues that there is a universal moral lawgiver. All 3 of these arguments argue for some kind of supreme being. It doesn't argue for Christianity necessarily, but it does argue for some kind of supreme being. It seems to me from these 3 tests that it makes the most sense to move from agnosticism to theism. Not necessarily Christianity yet, right? But from agnosticism to theism. So, questions on that so far? Yes?
Just another comment that I don't know it can be overemphasized that the second half of evolution is the strongest shall survive. It was Nietzsche's belief that Omnitron is the father of atheism. And it has led us now to Professor Sanger in Princeton saying that a pig's life is worth more than a child's life if that child isn't perfect. And that has been the foundation then, part of why abortion and elderly whatever may be the next targets in this political evolution that we're going on.
Yeah.
That is the Clarence Darrow argument for the strongest shall survive. That has to be emphasized. It never is. It's the second half of the atheist argument.
Yeah. If the strongest, if survival of the fittest is true, then how can we argue against men beating up women? Killing babies, getting rid of those who are, we seem to be expendable. Those are good thoughts. Anyone else?
What about our nation trying to tell North Korea or communist China that they need to treat their citizens better? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what basis are we telling other nations to do things differently?
Yeah, we're pleading for a universal moral code. You should love your neighbor.
Yeah,
That's what we're pleading for. But yet,
we're trying to eliminate the universal moral code.
we're trying to eliminate it, but we're wholly embracing it when we're saying, North Korea, you're wrong. Yeah, you're right. It's a good example. Because I think they should treat their citizens better. they think that it's better to starve them so they have more money so they can develop their weapons. But who are we to say, well, maybe you're right. Maybe having a strong country with lots of weapons is better than having citizens who are not hungry. Who are we to say that against them, unless we appeal to an absolute moral code? I have no problem with it because I think there is an absolute moral code. Okay. Food for thought. I want to watch a little YouTube here because remember we started out this whole thing with some atheists. Richard Dawkins is one of the big atheists that promotes atheism, that speaks why atheism is true and that there's no evidence for any kind of God and so forth. So he's arguing against these arguments that I have given for the existence of a supreme being of some sort. And so I thought we'd just show this. It's a little spoof called the Dawkins Delusion. So Mark's going to bring that up for us.
Today, Dr. Terry Tomirot, who's going to be talking to us about his latest book, The Dawkins Delusion. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tomirot. It's a pleasure to speak to you again.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
Now, Dr. Tomirot, you're famous for declaring in no uncertain terms that you are not a believer in Richard Dawkins. You don't think he really exists. Now, why is that?
Well, nothing's so simple, Richard. You shouldn't ask sensible people to believe in something unless you've got evidence for it. If there is a Dawkins, why hasn't he shown himself to me?
In your opinion, then, are people who believe in Richard Dawkins just a little bit dim?
Well, in a way I can understand the mistake. Simple people pick up a handful of books claiming to be written by Dawkins. And since the Dawkins seems to be a sufficient account for how they got to be, for the similarities in all the texts and so on, they stick with common sense and fallaciously conclude that this Dawkins, which they have never seen with their own eyes, actually exists.
Of course, some people do claim to have seen Richard Dawkins and even shaken his hand.
Yes, if you can believe them.
And you think they're all lying?
I didn't say that. Of course, there's no shortage of liars in the world, and undoubtedly some people who claim to have had these Richard Dawkins experiences are deliberately telling fairy stories. But, you know, the human brain is a very, very complicated thing, and conjuring up an imaginary Dawkins would be child's play for it. Christopher Robin had Binker, I had the slimy custard man. I suspect that something very similar is happening with people who claim to have seen a Richard Dawkins, or heard his voice, or felt his touch.
But the books aren't evidence for the existence of Richard Dawkins either.
No, of course not. As a scientist, it is no answer to the problem of where did this inane rubbish come from to stick a label on it that says Richard Dawkins. Each book is a simple rearrangement of only 26 letters. Even a child should be able to see that with a little random shuffling of vowels and consonants on a computer, one can arrive at all sorts of patterns like that. Working out how each letter got into the place that it did is the business of science. Claiming that Dawkins did it puts an end to an inquiry that promises to give us a full and satisfying explanation of how these books came to be, without the need for invoking a discredited, superstitious Dawkins of the Gap type hypothesis.
But some people might point to the fact that the letters are arranged in definite patterns, spelling out sophisticated chains of arguments, and that this is a clear mark of intelligence, not random accident.
If there were some kind of intelligence behind these books, then, judging by their contents, it is obviously a pretty poor one. We would hardly have lost much worth having by not believing in Richard Dawkins, or in what his books have to say. The scientific view of the matter is beautifully simple and invigorating. The works of Richard Dawkins are nothing but a collection of fortuitously ordered A's, B's, and C's, recombined from previous patterns. There is the Latin alphabet, there are the nonsense poems of Edward Lear, and there are the works of Richard Dawkins, and the one developed from the other through a series of random typing errors, though admittedly we haven't got all the details just now.
You admit that science hasn't got the answers to where they come from, then?
I haven't got all the answers. Science is working on it.
But can you be sure that science will get all the answers?
If science doesn't have the answers to where they came from, then Richard Dawkins' religion doesn't. If a Dawkins designed the books, then who designed the Dawkins? Just tell me that.
In your book, you have described the Dawkins revealed in the literature as an ostentatious, acrimonious, supercilious, pusillanimous, calumnious, censorious, vituperative, querulous, embittered, obsessive, and bombastic bully.
Yes, that seems fair enough to me.
Now, some people might say that that's going a bit over the top.
Read your Richard Dawkins if you think that. Just read it. Read A Devil's Chaplain. Apart from finding no evidence whatsoever for an intelligence hiding somewhere beneath the paragraphs in the mystical realm of blind faith, you will discover, on the other hand, plenty of intolerance and bigotry in every chapter. All of these very good reasons to have nothing whatsoever to do with this Richard Dawkins religion.
Dr. Tomirot, you have described this widespread belief in Richard Dawkins as a dangerous delusion. But what's especially dangerous about people believing in the existence of Richard Dawkins if it makes them happy?
Well, for one fairly obvious reason, these people believe any book which has Dawkins' name on the cover, and these books say a lot of very silly things. Belief in Dawkins has been responsible for filling the internet with non sequiturs, caricatures, straw men, and vitriol. Dawkins' disciples are militant. They are organized, and they're out to convert you and me. Yes, I would certainly call this a dangerous delusion. If there is a Richard Dawkins, he has a lot to answer for.
And sorry then, Dr. Tomirot, what would you say is your main objection to the Richard Dawkins belief?
My main objection is simply this. People are following a delusional Dawkins who is telling them what to think and believe when they should be following me.
Humor there, Richard. The Dawkins delusion. There's actually a book called The Dawkins Delusion that was written in argument against Richard Dawkins, but this is just a spoof. Okay, so you have the cosmological argument, you have the teleological argument, you have the moral argument for the existence of God. Seemingly plenty of evidence to help the agnostic say, yes, it makes more sense, at least when all the evidence is weighed in, to believe in some kind of supreme being. With just those arguments, what kind of supreme being are we talking about? What is God like just from those arguments?
Powerful, came up with that much complexity.
Okay, powerful, definitely. I mean,
Life from no
universe is pretty big. Life from no life, yeah, so very powerful, if not all powerful. Yeah, okay, good. What else?
Infinitely intelligent.
Infinitely intelligent, very, very smart. I mean, it's down to, remember when we looked at some of the factors for the universe and all of the different, that all these things had to be just so in order for life to even be possible in the universe. For someone to fine-tune all the knobs and stuff like that, very, 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 very intelligent. Okay, what else?
Morally perfect.
Morally perfect. At least that's an importance to this being. So moral, a very moral being. So
Outside of the creation.
okay, outside of the creation. So definitely not a part of the physical world because he's the one who created he, she, it. As we're just giving, we haven't proven this the God of the Bible yet. So I'm just trying to speak like that. So definitely outside of the creation. Okay, what else? Very creative, okay, and orderly. And if you're intelligent and creative, does that argue for personality? That you would have to be some kind of a personality, not an impersonal force. Okay, good. So a few things, once again, all of them the Bible brings out, doesn't it? So none of this has contradicted the Scriptures. It certainly hasn't proven the Scriptures yet. but it seems to go along with that when you look at these arguments that there's some kind of a being who's very powerful, very intelligent, personal, creative, and outside of the universe, yet able to somehow influence the universe by bringing it into existence at least.
And he has to hold it together.
And holding it together, because otherwise it's just... Right? I think so, sure.
I think of with the three bullets or the three diamonds there, just there's almost an emerging character, personality.
One who cares about what is right and good. Yeah.
Sense of humor.
When you look at the individual creation, sense of humor.
Yeah, look at
Yeah.
the platypus.
The platypus, that was a good one, wasn't it? Sure. Things to think about here. Okay, so we have, remember our apologetic line of progression. Atheism to agnosticism, agnosticism to theism, and then theism to Christianity is the next step. We have seen apologetic line of progression. Atheism to agnosticism, the appeal to the knowledge argument that the atheist doesn't have all knowledge, so he must admit that there's at least the possibility that there's some knowledge out there that he doesn't have that would reveal God. And so it's better to say, I don't know if there's a God or not, I just don't think so. So it's wiser for an atheist to become an agnostic and use the knowledge argument. From an agnostic to a theist, we've seen the cosmological argument, teleological argument, and the moral argument. That it makes more sense to believe in some kind of supreme being than it does to say, I don't know if there is and I don't think there is. It makes more sense to say, no, I'm pretty sure there is some kind of a supreme being who has some characteristics, some traits of power and knowledge and personality and goodness and so forth. Okay? This brings us to theism to Christianity. And we started this quite some time ago when we were looking at epistemology, and we compared the Bible to the Quran. And we looked at some of the arguments for the Bible. If you remember, the Bible made its own claim that the way to test it is the true God would be able to know the past accurately. He would be able to predict the future in detail without any mistake and be able to perform miracles. Okay, we saw that the Bible brings out all three of those factors, and so therefore a strong case that this book was written from God. And by the way, it kind of, at least it seems to me, at least feasible, if not probable, that if there is some kind of supreme being, and he created the universe, including living organisms and human beings that are intelligent, that there would have been a purpose for that, and that he would have at least tried to communicate with us somehow. And if the supreme being did try to communicate with us, he would probably do it in such a way that it would be a trustworthy communication. And so if that hypothesis is correct, and the Bible does fit this standard of revealing the past accurately, predicting the future in detail without any mistake, and then even the miracles that take place from this God, that this book is that revelation from God of what he's like and what his plan is. So the Bible argues for that. Oh, okay, thank you for that. And then since we've already gone over the Bible, and you can once again you can get some more of that information from the book, the Bible versus the Quran. The next one we'll look at is Jesus. Okay, we're going to take a break, then we'll look at Jesus and see if that argues strongly that Christianity is the proper representation of theism. Okay? So let's take a break and we'll come back.
Maybe I
By the way, we still have a number of these postcards for inviting people to the Easter service. At the tables, there's some over there too. Take a few, put them at your work or other places, invite people to, go ahead and use them, otherwise they're just going to go to waste. So take a few at least and use them and invite some people. That'd be great. Can't wait for Easter. Let's see. Okay, so we are now going to try to show why it makes most sense to move from theism to Christianity. That there's not just a supreme being out there, but that he has, in actuality, communicated with us in such a way that it was a trustworthy communication, that we can know who he is and what his plan is. Now, we can't know everything about him because we'd have to be infinite ourselves to be able to understand the infinite. But we can understand certain things because he has communicated those things. As I said, we looked at the Bible and saw the argumentation for the Bible. Now we want to look at Jesus and see the uniqueness of Jesus. And the first point is Jesus' identity. Was there a Jesus? In Russia, before the fall of communism, Russia taught in their propaganda to their people that there actually wasn't any Jesus. There was no historical evidence for him. It was just a myth, not an actual human being. Which is interesting because no historian that I know of embraces that anymore. Because there's so much overwhelming historical evidence for the basic facts that there was a man named Jesus who lived in the Palestine area, who gathered a group of followers, who claimed at least to do miracles, and who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Those facts are backed up by not just Christian sources, but by first century non-Christian sources. And if you want to write this down, Roman historian Tacitus, the Jewish historian Josephus, the Roman historian Thallus. Actually, interestingly, Thallus, he said that when Jesus was crucified, that the world went dark, and he said it went dark because of an eclipse of the sun. So he's arguing against the miracle nature of Jesus, and he's arguing against it by claiming, no, what really happened was there was an eclipse. But what's fascinating is, notice what he's admitting. That it was dark. There was a Jesus dying on a cross, and it was dark.
Did he see there happened to be an earthquake at the same time too?
Not Thallus. But what's interesting is, we know exactly when eclipses take place, don't we? Now that we know the whole science around it, we can pinpoint back, and we can go back as far as we want to and tell you exactly when the eclipses took place in different areas of the world. No eclipse at that time from the science. But Thallus admitted it, okay? Pliny the Younger. Once again, all of these are either Jewish or Roman historians. They're non-Christian historians admitting to the existence of a man named Jesus who gathered a group of followers who supposedly performed miracles. The Jews actually said that he performed miracles by magic and by dark magic. Okay, so they admitted there were miracles, but they just rejected them as not being from God. But once again, notice what they're admitting. Lucian, 2nd century Greek satires. All of these non-Christian sources showing, yes, there are these basic facts, at least, of Jesus' identity. But when we look at the identity and we look at the sources and the sources that we have of this man, C.S. Lewis, once again, is, I think, correct. He makes this statement. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, that is, about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. The options are, he's either a crazy man who claimed to be God but wasn't. And usually when we see people who claim to be God, we think they're a little crazy, right? Okay. So either he was a crazy man, or he was a liar. He said that he was the only way to the Father. He made these kinds of statements. So he talked about hell more than anybody else. So either he was a lunatic, a liar, or evil, or whatever, or he is who he said he was. The Son of God. Now, but Jesus' identity, that he definitely did exist, that cannot be discarded if you're going by the evidence anyway. You can say, but I just don't want to believe that he existed. Like, I don't believe in Richard Dawkins. That kind of thing, okay? But also the uniqueness. So, the identity of Jesus, but look at the identity of Jesus. His uniqueness compared to all other religious figures. His uniqueness stands out. First of all, his incarnation. That God took on a second nature, that of humanity, and became a human being. That is absolutely unique. Now, yes, we have Roman gods who impregnated women and other things like this and that, but that's not what we're talking about here. It has nothing to do with the incarnation. So the uniqueness of the incarnation, but then also the crucifixion. Remember, in the Old Testament, and once again we have copies of Isaiah that date prior to the time of Jesus. So we know this was predicted before it ever happened. That the Messiah would be crucified, would die in such a way to bring about the forgiveness of his people as a substitute. That is absolutely unique to all religions. No other religion has anything like this concept. The third, and I think this is the most important as far as our argumentation, and that is the resurrection. That in his uniqueness, he rose from the dead. And we have to deal with that. We have to say, decide, did that really happen or not? That's what we're celebrating when we come to Easter next week. Did the resurrection actually happen or not? And that's the deciding factor here. Oh, I didn't give you the Jewish form of our Seraphim in the first century. Sorry about that. Let's write that down. Jesus rose from the dead. The evidence. Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea in the tomb. He was buried. Both Jewish and Christian and non-Christian sources admit he was crucified, he was buried, he was dead, he was killed. Okay, so he was buried. On Sunday, the tomb was found empty by a group of women followers. Well, this is fascinating. This comes from the Gospels themselves. But the reason why it's fascinating is when you consider what the Gospels are claiming. You see, if the Gospels were making this up, they would have never said this. If this was all fabricated, they would not have said women were the first to find the tomb empty. Because back then, a woman's testimony was not seen as valid. It wasn't seen like a man's testimony. And so to say, oh, women saw him alive, people go, that's how they would have reacted. Okay? Now, today, we would disagree with it, right? The woman's testimony is just as valid as man's. We would disagree with the Quran. You know, the Quran does say that if two women say something, that's equal to one man saying something. Okay? So we would disagree with them. No, one woman's testimony is just as equal with one man's testimony, right? All husbands?
Yes.
Okay. That's good. But back then, that's not the way they thought. That's just simply not the culture. That's not the way they thought. There's the only possible reason why the Gospels would ever claim that women found the tomb empty, that they were the first ones, the first eyewitnesses. The only reason they would say that is because that's what happened. If they were making it up, they would not have done that. They would have had important officials with valid testimonies. That's what they would have made up if they were making this thing up. So this is actually a very strong evidence for the resurrection by making this little blunder. And they wouldn't have known they were making a blunder because they wouldn't have known, in 2,000 years, society is going to say women are equal to men. They wouldn't have known that, okay? So they just simply wouldn't have done this if they were making this up. So on Sunday, the tomb was found empty. Multiple post-resurrection appearances by Jesus that we have eyewitnesses who at least are claiming, we have over 500 eyewitnesses claiming to have seen him alive after he died. Now you can say they all lied, and that's fine, okay? But they were there. In fact, it was appealed to by Paul saying, most of them are still alive, you can go check them out. You can go ask them. You had the apostles. They all claimed to have seen Jesus alive after he had died. They all went through this. And so, ultimately, if that's the case, we need to ask the question, what happened to the body? And that's by the way, the original disciples believed he rose from the dead. So we have their testimonies. The original disciples believed he rose from the dead because they claimed they actually saw him rise from the dead. So he was killed on the cross, buried, 3 days later, bodies missing, all of these people claiming they saw him alive. So, how do we understand this? We put the crime scene here, okay? What happened to that body? That's the question we want to ask. And there's only a few possibilities. If you can come up with another one, please let me know. First of all, the body was still in the tomb. That, in fact, though they claimed he rose from the dead, he didn't. The body still in the tomb. What are the pros and cons of this argument?
Well, one con is if they wanted to disprove it, they'd just go get the body and show it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and both the Jews and the Romans would have wanted to disprove this. Once they started spreading this idea that Jesus, whom you crucified, and he's talking to the Jews and he's talking to Pilate, you know, he's alive now. That would have made both these groups look bad. They would have gone to the tomb and if the body was still in the tomb, they would have said, no, he didn't die, because here's his dead body, right? So why didn't they do that? Because it wasn't there. Still in the tomb? Seems like a very silly explanation for this whole thing, because once again they claimed that they saw him alive. They claimed that the stone had been removed. And once again they could be liars, because that's the second one. The disciples stole the body and lied about it. Okay, that is possible. In fact, the first century Jews, this is what they stated. The first century Jews said the disciples stole the body. Their account of this, notice what they're admitting. What are they admitting?
It's gone.
The body's gone. The first explanation, not there. The disciples stole the body. Okay? That is a possibility. That's the second possibility. What happened to Jesus' body? The disciples somehow stole the body. According to some of the accounts at least, there was a guard placed there at the tomb. And we don't have any reason to not believe that, but that this guard was placed there, and somehow all the guards fell asleep, and the disciples snuck in, very quietly moved that boulder out of the way in order to steal the body, okay, because they didn't want to wake the sleeping guards, right? So they steal the body, and then they go around and say, Jesus is alive! And remember, this is the same group of people that on the day that Jesus was, the guards came and took Jesus, they all scattered. And they're all hunkering down, afraid that they're going to get caught and thrown in jail themselves. This same group are the ones we're supposed to believe stole the body and went around saying, and that somehow brought them this strong faith to proclaim this. For what? I guess to make money? I don't know. Why did they do this? Stealing of the body and claiming they saw him alive when he really wasn't? And by the way, what happened to the disciples? What's that?
They were all killed for their faith.
They were all killed for their faith. Now, somebody might be willing to die for something they thought was true when in actuality it wasn't true, right? I mean, think about the suicide bombers. I think they're wrong. But they think they're right, and so they were willing to die for something that they thought was true when in actuality it really isn't true. Okay? So someone might be willing to die for something they thought was true when in actuality it wasn't true. But nobody's going to be willing to die for something they know isn't true. Right? And if they stole the body, they know he didn't rise from the dead, right? So they would know that it wasn't true. And yet they all died for their faith. This explanation is really far-fetched. It really doesn't hold to the actual, when you really start thinking about this. Another possibility that came out, this was a 19th century liberalism, came up with this idea, the idea of what's called the swoon theory, that Jesus didn't actually die. That when he was crucified, it just appeared like he died, and that in the cool of the tomb he was resuscitated, and in all of his strength after getting crucified, he pushed that boulder out of the way, very quietly so as not to wake those sleeping guards, and then went to the disciples and said, "I'm alive!" Actually, he would have said, now, we know from the accounts that the centurion made sure that he died. That was his whole job in life, is to make sure these guys died. That he actually stabbed him with a sword, and the account is very strange, because it says that blood and water flowed out. We know from modern cardiology that means that somehow the spear pierced the sac or whatever, and so if he wasn't dead, that would have killed him. Okay? No question about it, that would have killed him if he wasn't dead already. So, and then they put him in the tomb. There's just simply no way this idea could have possibly been true, but yet, and then Jesus fabricated the whole thing and just fooled everybody into thinking that he was alive and risen from the dead. But this one here is also just off the charts. Not much possibility to it, in my opinion. Okay, the Jesus look-alike theory. This is the Islam belief. Interestingly, Islam says that in fact Jesus was not crucified, but God made someone else look like Jesus, and so they crucified this look-alike instead of Jesus. So Jesus didn't actually die, but this look-alike died. The only problem with this is then that look-alike's body would have been in the tomb, right? And you still have a whole problem with, the body was missing. So this one here is really, really bizarre. And it ends up making God out to be a liar. He's deceived people into thinking that Jesus got crucified when he didn't, yes.
So Islam said that God made someone else to look like that?
Yes.
Well, why would God do that in their explanation?
Question. Why would God do that? I don't know. And you can ask them, why would God do that? No. And if God is all-knowing and knowing the future, then that means he knows that an entire belief system of some, 2 billion people are going to believe this lie simply because he made it look like when it really wasn't. He deceived them. That is some God, I'll tell you what. Yeah, but once again, I just put it up there because it's one of the possibilities. But really, the only other possibility is that he actually rose from the dead. Now, did I absolutely prove that he rose from the dead? No. But if you look at all the facts, it seems to me that unless you absolutely refuse to believe in miracles because you do not want to believe in miracles, it seems to me that all the evidence says the most likely of these, from all these factors, is that he really truly rose from the dead. But if he rose from the dead, that's big. Right? That's not just a little thing. That's like, wow, okay, I better listen to what he had to say. And if God recorded accurately in a book to tell us who he is and what his plan is for us, and the major part of that plan is for his son to die on the cross and 3 days later rise from the dead, then this stuff is true. Christianity is the right explanation for this supreme being. And it seems to me that when you look at all the evidence, it leans heavily towards this. So, I actually have a book by a non-Christian Jew who argues from the evidence that Jesus really did rise from the dead. Isn't that funny? True. He's a historian. He says, yes, it just makes sense. But he just doesn't think that he was the Messiah. But that's this. Questions on this?
I think it's important to realize, too, when you're thinking about the resurrection, to also realize that in his whole ministry, he was proving that he was God by everything he did.
Sure.
See, you wouldn't just look at the resurrection. You look at all the miracles. Because that, he was proving I'm God in that. And then on top of that, you have the resurrection.
And I think that there's a good reasons for embracing the miracles, that they're even just from a historical perspective, that these things really took place. These eyewitnesses are claiming that they saw all these things. Either they all are absolutely flat out lying, and the eyewitness nature of this is true because we know that the accounts that we have were written within the first century. So they were written within a very short time period. That, in fact, if they weren't true, those who saw the truth would have spoken out against it. The original disciples, if someone says, oh, Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, they say, no, that didn't happen. This is what happened. Those things would have come out. But in actuality, none of that. So they all made these claims for these miracles. So it's either a huge conspiracy theory kind of a thing here going on, or these things really happened. And they're describing these things. Even the non-Christian Jews admitted, yes, he did miracles, but they said, he did it through the power of Satan. But they're believing it. So even the miracles seem to have some good historical backing when you just look at the evidence from a non-biased perspective. So you're right. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the boulder too? Because I believe, from my understanding, the boulder wasn't just a pretty easy movable rock, but they made certain that there couldn't be
Well, these kind of tombs, and there are many of these tombs in Palestine area. These kind of tombs from rich people. It was a big boulder that they usually had a contraption that. It was set up like this, and then through a mechanism, it caused it to roll down into the thing. And it would take several men to push it out in order to get out. But once again, we don't. If you went to Jerusalem, somebody would show you the tomb. Do we know if that's the actual one or not? No, we don't know that. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's proof. But the examples that we have. Yes, this would have been not just an easy thing to go hide, sneak out, roll the boulder over, steal a body. It would have been a big thing to do.
I had learned a little bit about the boulder just through Ari Watkins, whatever curriculum we use in
Okay.
I learned a lot.
Well, and from the scriptures, it does describe that, and so that's a good. Yeah. There's once again no reason not to believe them. They seem to be recording these things accurately. The other things that they record, when you look at their historical value, especially Luke is a fascinating study. There are historians, one particular historian, who set out to disprove the Bible. He did major, just looked at the gospel, or not the gospel, but the book of Acts, and looked at these things that he described. And in every case, he found that this had to have been written by an eyewitness. That these things were accurate down to the detail over and over and over again. He became a believer. And it's because we have good reason to believe these are accurate accounts of what actually took place. And as believers, once you believe, then you know God does reveal to you, yes, of course, this is the inerrant Word of God, and so it's fully trustworthy, which once again makes sense that God would do something like that. He wouldn't want to lead us on and then say, now figure out which parts are true and which parts aren't. He's going to give us an accurate account. And so all the evidence shows the supernatural nature of the Bible, the supernatural nature of Jesus Christ, that these things are true. Once you embrace that, then you can fully embrace, yes, this is the inerrant Word of God, fully trustworthy. And so Christianity is the right explanation for this supreme being.
So Larry?
Yes?
Is there non-Christian references to the resurrection, to seeing Jesus after he...
Not non-Christian, of the only eyewitnesses, and every eyewitness became a believer. Now there are two examples of, three examples of non-believers who, after they eyewitnessed him, became believers. The first one is James. The first two are two brothers of Jesus.
But those are in the Bible.
These are in the Bible.
Right.
But James and Jude, both of them, his brothers, did not believe in him before his death. They said, we don't believe in you. Now, there's no reason why the Bible would record that they were unbelievers, because that kind of detracts, You don't want to admit that his own brothers didn't believe in him, because then you might think, well, maybe they shouldn't have believed in him. If his own brothers, maybe they saw something we didn't see, So the only reason why they'd admit that they were unbelievers is because that they were unbelievers. But we know that later on they were believers. We know James specifically Paul states that James was an eyewitness of Jesus' resurrection. You have to ask yourself, what would cause, let's say you, anybody here have a brother or a sister? Okay. If your brother or sister claimed to be God and then died, and you just thought they were ridiculous, what would later cause you to start believing they really are God? What? Yeah, see him rise from the dead. That's about the only thing that could possibly cause you to believe your brother or sister is actually God. That's the thing here that we're seeing here with James. James was an unbeliever, and he becomes a believer. What would cause a brother to think his brother is God, except the fact that he saw him live? That he saw him. He was one of the eyewitnesses. Same with Jude. Later, Paul was an explanation. Paul was actually killing Christians. He was killing Christians, having them put to death, because he was a zealot Jew who believed that Christianity was wrong. What would cause him to become an apostle of Jesus Christ and then die for his faith? The only explanation is what his explanation. He saw Jesus on the road, and Jesus appeared to him and said, "Why are you persecuting me?" It's the best explanation. I can't think of any other. So we don't have any non-Christians admitting to the resurrection, but we do have non-Christians admitting to that he was crucified and that there's no body and so forth. That's all of this, these explanations. So that's how I think we can answer the naturalist argument against God, and that's how we argue all the way to Christianity, one by one, in this regard. I love this little picture here. Okay, so here's the plan. We'll get the body out of the tomb, stash it somewhere, and then we come back and tell a story that will probably get us all killed. So who's with me on this? What are you going to do with this evidence? That's the question we want to ask people. What are you going to do with this evidence? And why not go with the evidence? That brings us to the next worldviews. We've looked at the Christian worldview. We've looked at the naturalist worldview. Now we want to look at the pantheist worldview. To start this out, I would like to watch a couple short clips from The Matrix so we can kind of see this idea of pantheism. So, first the spoon, then the cookies.
Do not try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
There is no spoon?
Then you'll see that it is not the spoon that bends. It is only yourself.
You're there with me. You're the oracle?
We don't get to see it? All right. We'll just go with the script. What was he saying? That picture. What was the worldview being portrayed? The idea that there is no spoon.
Create our own existence.
Okay, we create our own existence. Yeah. Everything's an illusion. This is what Hinduism teaches, the doctrine of Maya. That everything we see is an illusion. If you're familiar with the whole movie of The Matrix, it says that everything they believed was an illusion, that they were actually stuck in these little test tubes and were being used as little batteries for the machines that had taken over the world. Okay? The question is, how do you know they're not right? How do you know that really all of this is just simply a dream? In fact, it's your dream. Pretty good dreamer. That's how do you? But this is that. This brings this idea of pantheism. Have you seen Avatar? Movie? Okay. Avatar brings a similar idea, pantheistic, but more from the kind of American Indian perspective, but still pantheism. The idea that the world, the universe, is God. That's the pantheistic belief. The universe is God. We have Hinduism, Buddhism, and the New Age movement that we'll take a look at, all expressions of this pantheistic worldview. And so we'll take a look at those. Now this, I'm sorry for the pictures, probably not you probably can't see it completely clearly. But we want to start out with Hinduism and its beliefs. If you see this picture, this is the basic understanding of Hinduism, that below, this is kind of what we see, but you have these basic gods, and Hinduism believes in millions of gods. That there are millions of gods, not just one God, and that these gods are Avatars are actually incarnations of the gods. You have the three major gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, Shiva is the destroyer. But these three personal gods actually are an impersonal God. That there's a veil, and if you can see the veil called Maya, that's illusion. That even all of this, even all the gods are an illusion. That there really is just one thing. Everything is only one. There is no diversity. There is no you and me. This is just an illusion. There really is only God. And that is the Nirguna Brahman, which is the impersonal Brahman. And this is the idea that God ultimately is one, but he's impersonal. So it is impersonal. So all of the diversity we see is an illusion. We need to break out of that illusion. If all the diversity is illusion, then salvation is to be set free from the illusion, right? Really, then, salvation is to cease to be. Right? Because all is God. There's only one. There is no diversity. There is no world. There is no spoon. There is no you. There is no me. There is no chair. This is all an illusion. It really is just God. And that is Hinduism in a nutshell. 700 million adherents of Hinduism. They have their, the basic tenets of pantheism. So this is true of Hinduism as well as Buddhism, the New Age movement. That Atman is Brahman. Okay? What do I mean by that? Atman is kind of the word for humans. For man, not you and me, but man as a whole. And it's the everything is actually Brahman. Everything is actually God. Everything is God. In the New Age movement, they say, we are all gods. We just forgot. It's kind of a funny God that we forget that he's God. But Atman is Brahman. We are God. That all roads lead to the one. All different religious expressions lead to the one God and to this ultimate salvation. Karma. The idea of karma, and we need to understand that because it's kind of been popularized as kind of a neat little thing, but karma is actually, to the true Hindu, for sure, this is a very evil thing. This is a very, very bad thing because karma basically states that, first of all, it entails the belief in reincarnation, that we continue to come back in other forms because we have to suffer for our wrongdoings. Karma is an absolute law that for everything you do that's bad, you have to suffer for that. So there's absolutely no grace in the idea of karma. No grace at all. Everyone. So whatever you do in this life, when you're reincarnated, you will come back and have to pay for that. So if you're really bad in this life, you're going to come back as a toad or something that's going to be miserable, right? You might come back as a human being in a very impoverished state, so to speak. And in fact, in India, they have the whole caste system. That they have those who are really living it up, and they have 7 castes, and then the bottom caste below the 7 castes is the unmentionables. And they're just suffering from their past lives, right? Yes.
If it's all illusion, what's bad doing?
It's a great question, and that's a great question to ask your Hindu friends, okay? If it's all an illusion, then what do you even mean by karma, okay? The idea of Maya in my opinion, logically takes away the idea of karma. Maya has to get rid of karma. The two cannot coincide. But Hinduism does not say things have to be logical. So if logic itself is something that's under this veil of Maya, it doesn't matter. You simply then say, okay, so logic doesn't make sense, so it doesn't matter if I'm good or bad or anything, it's all Maya, and all of this is an illusion, so you won't mind if I pour this hot water over your head, and you have the boiling water, and Ravi Zachariah did this, actually, with a Hindu, and he boiled the water, and he says, I'm just going to pour this on your head, and the guy says, you're crazy, and he ran away. It's like, you don't live up to your beliefs. Okay? But karma, and this is important for us to recognize here, reincarnation for the Hindu is not a good thing. They hate it. The evil cycle of reincarnation is something they long to be off of. And so how do they get off of that wheel? We'll see that in just a moment, but this is the understanding of karma that brings us out. They also embrace the idea that history is cyclical, that it doesn't have a beginning and an end, that it's not moving towards a climax, that it just keeps going around. Okay? History is cyclical, not straight. And that's the basic beliefs of karma. The basic beliefs of pantheism, but especially that of Hinduism. Hindus have their scriptures. They have books that they don't see them in this exactly similar light as we do with the scriptures, because we see the scriptures as historical documents. They don't even claim that their documents are historical. They don't mind myth and legend and all of that. It doesn't matter if it's really true or not, because really there is no spoon anyway. Right? But their scriptures, they have what's called the Vedas, which mean books of knowledge. 4 Vedas, written before 100 BC. Then the Upanishads, these were more philosophical writings. After that, the Code of Manu, written around 100 BC. The Code of Manu is where they got the caste system for Hinduism. Which, by the way, the caste system makes a lot of sense in this idea of karma, doesn't it? But it also makes sense why you would not want to help the poor. If you help the poor, then you're just simply going to make them have to come back again to suffer for their previous sins, because they're there in that poor state because of their previous life. To help them is really not to help them. And that's why they usually avoided that. When Gandhi came and spoke out against the caste system, that was very humanitarian of him, very nice of him, but very non-Hindu of him, to speak against the caste system. He was speaking against his religion, which I think was a good thing, because I think it's terrible that they don't take care of their poor. And they still don't. And they could. India has tremendous resources. It could easily support those people, easily feed all of their people and take care of them. But their religion is holding them down. Their beliefs are holding them down. They just eat some of those cows instead of worshiping them, or feed them and use the milk and this and that. I mean, there's ways in which they could take care of themselves. I saw one statistic that said that India itself, because of its tremendous resources, could produce enough wheat to feed the entire world, not just India. And yet their people are starving. It's because their religion has led this. So to say all religions are the same, to say all roads lead to the one, So the Code of Man in 100 BC and the Bhagavad Gita, a very popular one around the time of Christ, actually, a devotional epic describing the dialogue between the hero warrior god Krishna and Arjuna, his friend and disciple. And so we've seen the chart on Hinduism, truths, pantheism. I said Atman is Brahman, God is the universe. What are the implications of that belief, the first belief there? That God is the universe. Oh, wait, I already go over. I just looked at the clock and it was 10:10. Who moved it? We'll stop here. Think about that. Ponder that question. What are the implications of the belief that God is the universe? Okay? And we'll come back to that.